Hey sickos, and welcome back to another podcast. I'm your host, Sensory Stowers, and I have a few updates for you all. Yes, a few updates. I feel like it's been a while since I've done a podcast, but we are back and we are now on Apple Podcasts. So if you are not following me on there, then you might want to do that. You might want to go to Instagram and follow our new Instagram for the new podcast whole revamp at Generation X Stream. I will put the link and the details in the description of this podcast. But firstly, you might notice, as I mentioned, that the podcast has changed its name from Extreme Cinema Podcast to Generation Extreme. Well, I feel like since I'm taking my podcast seriously, I wanted a new name, a new revamp with all new social to go along with it, as well as new merch, which will be up in the next few days, piece by piece. But please hit me up at Sensory Stowers on Instagram or Generation Extreme on Instagram. And let me know what you think of the new home of our Extreme Cinema podcast, which is Generation Extreme. Now, secondly, my new first official book, Degree of Darkness, is now available to pre-order for £15, including postage. So if you are new to the world of BDSM, the alternative lifestyle that I personally live and have done for 15 years, this is the book for you. Now, my book does go into detail, but it not only goes into detail, but it takes you places that you may have not been before. But my book also educates you on BDSM and the alternative lifestyle from start to finish, from A to Z. So if you want that VIP pre-order, hit me up on Instagram again at Sensory Stowers or Generation Extreme, and hit me up for the book, and I will send you the link and the details. Now, relating to the Extreme Cinema Festival, the Battle of the Extremes, it was supposed to happen next year. However, I want to put it on the back burner just for now until it gets more publicity and exposure. I will keep you all posted near the time that I want to get the festival all over the internet, basically, so we can have a great weekend of extreme cinema, food, alcohol, and not to mention a damn good time. Now, today's podcast is yet another interview from the most awesome white Gardenia, aka Daniel Valiant. I've personally previously done an interview, but that was on my XXX.web podcast, if you remember rightly. So stop this podcast, listen to that one, then come back and I'll give you 5 seconds to stop this episode. Go and do that now. Did you do it? Did you do it? Good. Now, hey, Daniel Valiant. Daniel. How are you doing since we last spoke?
Yeah, we're doing really good, Kirsty. Thanks a lot for having us on your podcast again. We've been super busy on a bunch of different projects, filming stuff, but also composing music for several films, including White Gardenia just composed the soundtrack for Vivian K. Quintero's new film, and then a million other things.
Well, that's absolutely brilliant that you're keeping yourself busy. I'm just the same, Daniel. You know, the fact that you've got to keep yourself busy. I'm more busier now than ever, and I would class myself as a workaholic, let's be honest. But can you and Alison tell the audience, for those that haven't listened to the previous podcast, Naughty, what you are both best known for?
We're probably best known for Tetro Video's XXX Dark Web, and that segment that we filmed for that features real life vampirism, blood drinking, and self-mutilation. We're also probably known for Broke House's How to Raise Women from the Dead, which is sort of a Sergei Eisenstein style propaganda film, an appeal to solve the problem of death. And I guess that's probably what we're best known for. I'm probably the most proud that a couple of my videos are featured on mathematical physicist Frank Tipler's official website, since he's one of my biggest heroes.
Yeah, I personally loved that film, XXX.web. If you have not seen that film or you don't know anything about it, you might want to go back and re-listen to the podcast XXX.web, which I taught you to do before, because we're going into detail about that film and we talk about that. And if I jilt a little bit, I do apologise. There's a fly flying around this room and it's really bugging me right now. But anyway, Daniel, can you tell us what projects have you been working on since we last spoke, please?
A million different things. Like I mentioned, we have collaborated with several other directors. Alejandro Hernandez asked us to shoot a sequence for his new film, Justine, which is based on the Marquis de Sade novel, and that's coming soon from Tetro Video, I think. The director Gore Filth asked me to shoot a sequence for his new film, and I was not totally familiar with his films, so he sent me one of his films called Zombie Ape Bloodbath, which is kind of in the tradition of Ed Wood, or some of those directors from the 50s and 60s, and Zombie Ape Bloodbath was great. You know, one of the best films I've seen all year. So I immediately agreed to help him with his new film. And then White Gardenia has a segment in Marcus Koch's Symbolicus Volume 2. That clip is a collaboration with Poison Rouge and Demiziano Cristofaro. And we also have a segment coming up in Volume 3 of Symbolicus. Besides that, we're working on a feature-length film called Sleeping Beauty. So far, it's been kind of a slow and methodical process so far. It's kind of moving in slow motion. But it's sort of a follow-up to How to Raise Women from the Dead. It involves the mathematician and cryptoanalyst Alan Turing, and it kind of connects quantum theory with dream logic.
I see where you're coming from the Sleeping Beauty point of view. The fact that, you know, he did kiss her back to life again. So he did raise her from the dead, technically, didn't he? No, but on a serious note, I'm looking forward to seeing that. Marcus Cook, he is absolutely brilliant. I did an interview with Marcus Cook, just in case the listeners don't know this. But my interview was previously published on Tumblr back in the day, and I can't find it ever again. So I'm going to have to re-interview Marcus Cook, if that is a possibility, or try and go in the archives of Tumblr and republish it on my social media. Who knows? But anyway, Daniel, what can we all expect from you in the future?
Yeah, you're describing XXX Dark Web, and in that segment, Alison drank my blood, and then earlier in that segment, Alison cut herself and I drank her blood, and then there are some clips like MIP AMH where I cut myself and then drink my own blood. And so there's some auto-vampirism stuff going on. But yeah, lots of sanguinarian blood drinking. And then there are some, there's also some other clips, like a perfume made from blood and tears that we did with the German band Oval. And again, in that video clip, we're drinking each other's blood. So, I mean, that's what people can expect. Blood drinking, vampirism, and unsimulated. The blood drinking in the films is real, and but I think also extreme ideological content. Me and Alison both have pretty extreme ideologies. We're sort of polar opposites, and I think that makes our films interesting to have that tension. We're both definitely obsessed with death, but I'm personally on my side of the equation. I'm very much opposed to death, while she's very sort of pro-death. And so we have these polar opposite views. But that I think that can make for interesting collaborations, that sort of tension. Like there have been great partnerships like that. Salvador Dali and Louis Buñuel were polar opposites. Dali was a far-right conservative Catholic, and Buñuel was a far-left communist atheist. And they made two of the greatest films of all time together, and eventually they ended up hating each other, but while they were together, they made some of the greatest art of all time, in my opinion. Some of the greatest moments in the history of filmmaking.
Well, thank you, Daniel, for explaining all that in as much detail as you did. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Now, for those that don't know out there, I'm a sanguinarian too. I did briefly mention that on my Instagram, which I can go over in a later date. If anybody wants to know any more information about that, I'm very open to talking about that. But anyway, Daniel, I've got a question about goth. Now, would you both say that goth is the same as emo, or do you class them both differently?
Well, I think that emo was an extension that it was the early 2000s version of goth. And I think that in those post-hardcore emo bands, a lot of them were Christian bands, and they were really obsessed with tragedy, car wrecks, plane wrecks. There are a million songs from that era about car wrecks. And the thing about that is, if you step back, so there's a million songs about car wrecks in that 2000s time frame. But if you step back 40 years from that point, before goth, there was always this kind of shadow side to pop music. If you go back to the late 50s and early 60s, you still had kids who were obsessed with morbid things. But in those days, in like the late 50s, you had the beginnings of the teenage tragedy genre, which would give way to a million songs like Dead Man's Curve by Jan and Dean, the Shangri-La's Leader of the Pack, Last Kiss by Wayne Cochran, Moody River by Pat Boone, Strange Things Happen by Dickie Lee. All these songs about car wrecks, and then that genre of teenage tragedy songs would evolve into the splatter platters and death discs of the late 1960s. And that would actually evolve into death rock, like DOA Blood Rock, Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult, stuff like that. And if you look at the Wikipedia page for death rock, it actually draws a line from the teenage tragedy of the 1950s directly to goth music. And I'm not sure that's completely accurate, actually, but yeah, you can definitely draw a straight line from teenage tragedy to death rock. And so there's always been this dark and there's always, even back then, there was this dark and morbid side to pop music.
Well, that is really, really interesting, and I have looked at that Wikipedia page before, and you are so right with that. So if anybody hasn't heard about that, then you need to go and check it out. But now, for those that don't know, can you please explain the occult, I should say?
Well, I'm no expert. I wish Allison could, Allison is the expert. I'm more of an expert on Christianity, but Allison is the expert on the occult. The one interesting story I could tell you in the context of our horror films is a story about when we were filming XXX Dark Web a few years ago. And Allison introduced me to the works of Erica Fervel, who is an accomplished artist and occultist. In fact, her paintings have featured in a couple of White Gardenia clips. And Erica explained a few interesting things to me in regards to the segment that we shot for Dark Web, XXX Dark Web. Because in that sequence, which is the sequence where I cut off my little finger with the butcher's knife, in that sequence I saw, as we were filming it, I saw a vision of Santa Claus. It was either Saint Nick or Santa Claus or some other iteration of the Father Christmas character. And it was strange because nothing could have seemed more far removed from the topic of our film. But I think it had something to do with the color of my blood mixed with the green arugula and the white cutting board that was set on the table in front of us. And this was the colors of Christmas. And then those colors became, for some reason in that room, like Christmas became real. It became like a real thing. And Santa Claus appeared to me. And the significance of this hallucination only became clear about 1 year later when Erica Fervel explained to me that Santa Claus was at least in part kind of a Christianized version of the Norse god Odin. And I was more or less aware of that, but what surprised me was when Erica explained that Odin's followers used to perform blood offerings as part of their rituals. So in some strange, mysterious way, I may have summoned Santa Claus, or at least a kinder, gentler version of Odin, with that mutilation and blood drinking, with the blood drinking that we were doing.
The Santa Claus part always gets me a little bit, but I can see where you come from with the colours that you mentioned. But anyway, what was both of your first ever horror movies?
Let's see. I think it was more seeing the video cases in the video stores, like seeing the covers to all these old horror films and imagining what they were like. That was when I was a kid, walking down the aisles at my local video store. And beyond that, I saw a lot of Hitchcock films when I was young. I probably saw Vertigo when I was 10 or 11, and And that film blew me away. And then Frenzy, which is, even if his other films are full of horror, that one certainly is.
I think my first ever horror movie was Nightmare on Elm Street number 3, which was Dream Warriors, I believe, or number 4. But I love that franchise so much. But my first ever extreme cinema, which I'm going to ask you in just a minute, but my first ever extreme cinema film was probably Flowers. That's the one that I remember. But anyway, do you and Alison believe in the supernatural?
Yeah, I do believe in the supernatural because, first of all, anyone who knows me knows I'm an extremely skeptical person. And I don't fuck around with conspiracy theories. I'm very skeptical by nature. However, there has to be a supernatural component to reality, at least in this sense, because for the universe to have even come into existence, it had something beyond the known laws of physics had to be taking place, because under the known laws of physics, something cannot arise from nothing. The universe could not have arisen from a quantum vacuum. And so there had, whatever it was that started this universe, that initiated the Big Bang, that's something supernatural because it is superseding the known the physical laws, as outlined by thousands of years of science. And so, yes, there has to be a supernatural component, and I hope that the fact that there is something supernatural going on there means that there's a life after death. For life to have meaning, there has to be life after death. There has to be immortality, or humans have to achieve immortality. Death has to be defeated for life to have meaning. And so I hope that the fact that there's a supernatural means that if there's not, that's why transhumanism, the life extension movement, and the extropic anti-death movement, I'm completely in favor of that. And when I read Frank Tipler's book, The Physics of Immortality, that book really blew me away because he was outlining how immortality can be achieved through science and how the dead can be resurrected through science, through a scientific process. And his follow-up book to that was The Physics of Christianity, and that book is just, maybe equally important. The thing about those books is that in The Physics of Immortality, after reading it, I'm like, well, okay, if there is not a supernatural component to life, then through science we can still make this happen just through, simulation theory, through resurrecting the dead. But then the book, The Physics of Christianity, came out, and Tipler said, basically, I've reevaluated it. This isn't a replacement or a backup for Christianity. He basically asserted he thinks this is what Christianity was predicting, is that Christianity was predicting that we would raise the dead through these processes, in the Bible when it talks about resurrections taking place in the far future. So that's really fascinating to me. So yeah, I'm very much in favor of the idea of faith and the idea of religion in general.
I'm not gonna lie, that was really fascinating to listen to, I must admit. Now I've got a question for you. Why do you think people need to see more and more, the more blood and guts, the better, if you will?
Well, it's like a drug, in a certain sense. It's like a drug addiction. You want to keep getting the adrenaline flowing. I think that's kind of it. You move on to the harder stuff, just like a drug addict does. I'm straight edge, but I'm addicted to horror, and so I don't do drugs, but I'm addicted. I'm definitely addicted to finding the next level, figuring, and not just the films I watch, but also the films I make. Everything I do is ethical and legal, but it's within those parameters of legality. As long as it's legal, I'm always trying to figure out like the next place I can take that will not only hopefully horrify the viewers, but make it interesting for us.
So, going on to your movies, would you say your films have a story attached to them, or are they more to the viewer's imagination, like Lucifer Valentine's, for example?
Well, they are usually real life events, real life rituals. So they have long and complicated narratives, but connected to the real world, because it's things that we're actually doing to each other.
So, on other directors, what is your opinion on the likes of Lucifer Valentine, Scott Philip Jurgens, Sam Hell, as well as many others?
Well, I think that, he's one of my good friends, Sam Hell. And of course, Sam Hell runs the label of Broke House, which has released several White Gardenia films. He's one of my good friends. And of course, I love Sam Hell. And then the other one you mentioned, Scott Philip Jurgens, he seems like a really cool guy. I haven't seen 29 Needles yet, but I really want to check that out. I think that Scott is actually an executive producer on this new film, La Triste, that I just did the soundtrack. White Gardenia just did the soundtrack for this new film. It's I'd love to talk to him one of these days. And then Lucifer Valentine, I don't know if I hate to say I don't know if I've seen any of his films, but again, that's one I'd love to check out his. I've heard a ton of good things about it. I'm so behind on the times, I don't even really know how to watch films anymore. I used to have a video store here in town, but it just recently went out of business, and I don't understand or know how to watch films on the online stuff. I've never used Netflix or Redbox or any of that. So I'm just if I don't watch a film at the local cinema, I'm kind of out of luck.
You do not watch Netflix. Oh my god, you are behind on the times, dude, aren't ya? Oh my god. Now, moving swiftly on, what are some of the most extreme scenes that you've done?
Well, I think that the most extreme, I think to other people's perception, the most extreme scene is the finger, where I cut my finger off in XXX Dark Web, my pinky. And that was not the most painful by any stretch. There was a little bit of pain involved with that. Delayed. It was a delayed reaction. Later, hours later, I started feeling some pain. The most extreme sequence was for a film I did called. It's more or less unreleased film, although a couple people have seen it. A couple people got some advanced, DVR cuts of. I still haven't fully edited the film, but that it's the most painful, and it was, and that was kind of another conceptual sequel to How to Raise Women from the Dead, which is dealing with quantum theory, dealing with extropic theory. It was serious, pretty serious topics, definitely not tongue in cheek, and it was called How to Raise Your Son from the Dead. There's a couple DVRs of that floating around. That different people ordered from me directly. If anyone's interested, feel free to contact me, and you can see like the 10 most painful minutes of my life.
I'm gonna have to check that one out. I want to see you in pain. No, I'm only joking. I am kind of a sadist, but jokes aside, how did you and Alison meet for the first time?
Me and Allison met a few years back, and she's obviously one of my favorite people to collaborate with. We've made several films together. I don't actually have sex, and I don't masturbate, but I did make a rule that if any girl wanted to have sex with me, I would have sex with her as long as she would let me film the sexual encounter and use it for art. And so Allison was one of the girls who volunteered to do this, and she was actually, I was my friend Bridger. She was mutual friends with my friend Bridger, and he told me that he knew a girl who wanted to have sex, and he said that she would be willing to let me film it, and so I agreed, and then he introduced me to her. Well, I'd met her before. I just then he said, and I didn't know that she was the girl that wanted to have sex with me, and then I went to his house, and I was very amazed that she was the girl that wanted to have sex with me, because obviously she's beautiful, you know, one of the most beautiful girls I've ever seen. And then we made a film. Probably next week we made a film, and then we've made films, you know, countless films since then. She, like I said, she's in XXX Dark Web. She's in How to Raise Women from the Dead. And one side note about, you know, I would be willing to, when I made that rule, I'd be willing to have sex with any girl that approached me, as long as they were willing to let me use it for art. Strangely enough, the girls that have actually approached me about this, or have wanted to be involved with this, with my project, willing to have sex and allow me to film it, have all been girls like Allison, like girls that could be models. And that's really, really weird, I think, that the girls have been so beautiful. Every single one of them has been, you know, beautiful enough to be professional models. So there's people say there's beautiful people in White Gardenia, but it's all totally by chance. It wasn't designed that way. It was just happened by chance.
Well, aren't you the lucky one? Yeah, I get approached by people all the time, especially on FetLife and Instagram and stuff like that. Mostly about submissives and stuff like that. But anyway, next question. Why do you do the kind of movies that you do?
I think that the reason I make the kinds of films that I do, I think there's two kinds of people in life. I think there's people who like sex, and there's people who like violence. And I'm definitely the kind of person who likes violence. So I do make violent films. But I think that violence can be constructive, you know, on some level. We live in a violent universe, and I think that art can, one of the reasons there's violence in films, in my films and films in general, is to get ready to, you know, to acclimate people to the, if you look forward in this timeline, you know, in this universe, looking forward, there's a lot of potentially violent, potentially traumatic things coming forward, you know, yet to come in the timeline. And so the human race, you know, for the human race to survive, we need to get used to the idea of pain. And I think that's one way we acclimate ourselves is through art. And that's why one reason I think that people like violence, that people need violence to process this idea, if you look forward, there's Frank Tipler, who's one of my heroes. As I was mentioning earlier, he's a mathematical physicist at Tulane University, and he talks a lot about his theory, the omega point theory, where you're looking at ways to develop unlimited information processing, where the human race can develop potentially, hopefully, unlimited information processing. And one of the ways to do that is, he developed this theory when the most widely accepted universal model was the Big Crunch theory, where the universe would collapse in on itself. You know, eventually the universe, is it going to end in heat death, where it just drifts apart, or is it going to end in a big crunch? Well, when Tipler developed this theory, the widely accepted view was the universe would end in a big crunch, where it contracts and eventually implodes in on itself, essentially. And that, most people say that sounds like a pretty bleak outlook, but Frank Tipler says, no, that's actually, that kind of energy that would be facilitated through a big crunch would give us infinite computational capacity, because that would give us an infinite bandwidth to work with as far as running you know, hyper simulation. We would be able to, with that kind of information processing, we could run a simulation so complex, you know, we could easily bring back the dead, bring back anyone who's ever lived or could ever possibly have lived. And so this takes on a religious significance, and it's an idea I love. I fell in love with this idea. I like to think about this idea. And so you could basically, artificial intelligence in this computer could live forever in whatever kind of heaven we create, and it would go on forever, even though the end would come in subjective time. It's a really interesting and paradoxical thing to consider, but it takes on religious significance. David Deutsch talks about that in his book Fabric of Reality, just to kind of describe like the levels of violence, the ways that the universe would be deformed in this kind of a big crunch scenario. He explains in the book how like the shape of the universe would actually change from a three-sphere to a three-dimensional analog of the surface of an ellipsoid, and the degree of deformation would increase and then decrease with respect to different axes. And so the frequency of the amplitude and frequency of these oscillations would increase without limit, so that a literal infinite number of oscillations would occur, even though the end would come in a finite time. And it would, tear everything apart. All matter, even the atoms themselves, would be wrenched apart by the gravitational shearing forces generated by this. And so it's this is something. The extreme violence of this is so it's an extremely violent event, and but instead of just looking at this as the bleak end of the universe scenario, there's actually this can be used. This is a good thing. This can be used for information processing, and so this takes on religious significance. This is something I hope will happen, and I sometimes think I'm mapping out this idea on my own body when I'm like stabbing myself in the shoulder and the side with scissors. I think I might be mapping out like this idea, playing out this idea of like 1/4 of the universe being exploding outwards, and I often draw correlations between physics and the different and in my films. There's references, and then there's subtext involving quantum physics in my films, and so to get to that point, though, I mean, to keep the human race going to that point, we might have to go through some pretty, there might be a lot of pain involved. There might be like pretty absurd amounts of pain that the human race will have to get through. We already are. I mean, our ancestors went through so much suffering to get us to this point, so we can get to this point where this is the best point in human history up till now. I mean, this is the best time to live. If you look at the arc of human history, if you look at how things have improved, at how lifespans have improved, how technology has improved. And so I want to make sure, I'm hoping the human race will continue to keep going forward, and we'll and I think part of that going forward process is getting used to the idea of pain, so that acclimating ourselves to the idea of pain. And so that's sorry to go on at such length, but yeah, I think that's one of there's many reasons I make the kind of films I do, but that's one of the reasons. Is these are just processing these kinds of ideas.
Wow. I could listen to you talk all day. Very interesting what you've just come out with there. Very interesting idea. I never thought about anything like that, if I'm honest. But I get what you're saying, though, about advancing of the human nature and stuff like that, and it's the best time to live at the moment because of technology and everything like this. I mean, I can understand where you're coming from. At the same time, I think technology is brilliant, like internet and stuff like that. And, you've got the likes of Skype, and you've got video calls and everything like that. That's great in some ways, but in other ways it can be really bad for the society at the same time. But I get where you're coming from. Now, I've got a question for you to just about end this interview. Are you or Alison involved with the alternative lifestyle at all?
We definitely made some customized videos, and we definitely were doing that for a while. We were working on like porno clips, BDSM clips, like some pretty strange stuff, but it was
stuff that was commissioned by other people that I was like happy to put my own, kind of recontextualize it as in a certain way to make it more interesting for us to film. We're trying to get away from that stuff, but we're still doing a little bit of customized. If the price is right, we're interested in doing some customized stuff, and so feel free to contact us if anyone's interested.
There you go, everybody. If you were interested, contact Daniel, White Gardenia. So thank you so much, Daniel, White Gardenia, for your time. I really, really appreciate it, and thank you so much for taking time out to do this interview. But could you let the listeners know again where they can find your films and where they can follow you?
Well, thanks so much. Thanks again, Kirsty. We really appreciate it. Always appreciate being on your podcast. And you can find our films. You can go to baroquehouse.com where you can order How to Raise Women from the Dead. You can go to tetravideo.com. And at tetravideo.com, I think you can get XXX Dark Web and Vor Gore. And you can go to gordrome.com where you can get Mutilation Theater, which is an anthology, fairly comprehensive anthology of our films, over 4 hours worth of content. So that's gordrome.com, abaroquehouse.com, and tetravideo.com. And always feel free, people can message me if there's anything they'd like. I do have DVRs, homemade DIY DVRs that I sell, that I send out. So feel free to contact me if you'd like anything, or like to inquire about anything. But anyways, thanks again, Kirsty, and hope to talk to you soon.
Aww. And I appreciate you, Daniel, for coming on my podcast and doing this interview once again. Now, that is it for today's interview. Don't forget, if you want to follow us on social media, you can follow us at Generation Extreme on Instagram or our Facebook page now. We have one of those now. The merch for Generation Extreme will be coming out in the next few days, maybe to next week. I do have a few days off and a few days, I have a week off in October and a week off in August. So I'll be focusing on the podcast and stuff then. I am going to York in August though, the weekend. But also don't forget that my first new book is out for pre-order. Don't forget about that. That's for £15 including postage. So if you're interested in that, you can contact me on social. But don't forget to check out Daniel Valiant on Facebook, White Gardenia, Facebook, Instagram. Please check him out. He's an awesome guy. Give him all the love. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this podcast, this interview, and I'll see you next time. Bye.